So thank you. So I will discuss an old technique to prove existence of spectral gap in the case of open problems. So we saw already a bunch of talks on quantum chaos in the on compact hyperbolic surfaces, and then at the very end of each talk there was probably 5 minutes devoted to the open case. Yeah, probably 10 minutes in your case. So I guess I have to recall a little bit the problem, the setup. So it's for hyperbolic surfaces. So we look at non-compact surfaces. So we want to look at surfaces of the type gamma mod H. So H square is the hyperbolic space plane. And so gamma is going to be a convex co-compact group. I will explain briefly what it is. So it's the simplest setup of infinite volume hyperbolic surfaces. So basically, you want to take a geometrically finite group, but with no cusp, okay, to keep it simple. So the case of cusp is more tricky. So basically what you want to look at is if you take the disk model, essentially in dimension 2, a convex or compact group can be always viewed as a Schottky group, okay? So essentially it will be generated by a finite number of isometries, and the fundamental domain will be something like that. So it has infinite volume, and you look at basically the free group generated by these guys. So instead of giving an abstract definition, which could take too much time, I'm just drawing some pictures. And then when you take the quotient, you basically here you have a pair of pants. So you have infinite volume ends. And here the picture is given by this pant. So we have 3 funnels, and the boundary here of the convex core is given by 3 closed geodesics. And so that's a basic picture, and this is what you have to keep in mind. So of course you have a limit set at infinity. So when you let the group gamma act on the disk, orbits will accumulate at infinity, and so you define just your limit set by the closure of the action of gamma on any point inside the disk. It does not depend on the point, and you look at what remains at infinity, okay? And so we have this important.
You took two generators just to do not be too general? Or
No. 2 generators is just for the picture, but in general you can have several. I'm just drawing a basic picture, and you can figure out what is the general definition, okay? I will come back to that later. And so we have the dimension of the limit set, which is an important parameter in this business. So it's actually also the critical exponent of Poincaré series in this case. And so we want to look at spectral problems. So we look at the Laplacian. On such a surface. And so we know by Lax-Phillips a long time ago that the L2 spectrum is completely understandable. It's fairly simple. There is a continuous part which will start at 1/4. So Lax-Phillips gives you the L2 spectrum of delta X, okay? So the continuous spectrum is this half line and then you may have some eigenvalues, some L2 eigenvalues below 1/4, but it depends on the dimension of the limit set. So if dimension is smaller than 1/2, there are no eigenvalues. And so, of course, I forgot to say that there are no embedded eigenvalues in the continuous spectrum. Okay. And if delta is strictly bigger than 1/2, so this dichotomy is very important in the business of spectral gap. You will see very soon why. There are L2 eigenvalues, at least one, and the bottom of the spectrum is given by delta times 1 minus delta. Okay, base, that's the base eigenvalue. And then there is an
actually absolutely continuous.
Yes, it's absolutely continuous, and there are no embedded eigenvalues. Okay. Okay, so the L2 spectrum is very poor, but there is a way to define resonances which is more relevant for many problems, for many counting problems, and for wave equations, which is the following. So, from this description of the spectrum, you know that if you look at the resolvent of the Laplacian with this spectral parameter acting on L2, it will be defined in a half plane, which is basically given by the following picture. Here you have 1/2. Okay, so you take real part of S bigger than 1/2. Then by this description, the resolvent is well defined. You may have some poles which will correspond to the possible eigenvalues. Okay, so in this spectral parameter, the Selberg S parameter, everything is shifted like that. And so this resolvent is well defined as a family of meromorphic operators, and the only possible poles are somewhere here. Okay, so this is the picture when delta is bigger than 1/2, and when delta is smaller, there is nothing. It's analytic in this half plane. And then there is a way to perform some meromorphic continuation. And this is where you see resonances. So resonances they are given by a meromorphic continuation, but how do you do it? So it's a result by Mazzeo and Melrose, which says that if you cut off your resolvent or if you put some appropriate weights, so let me call this guy, it has no name yet, so let me call it R of S. So if you change your function space, and this is where you lose self-adjointness in the problem. Then this guy has a meromorphic continuation to the full complex plane. And the poles, so it's meromorphic in the sense of finitely meromorphic, okay? Meaning that you have a Laurent expansion and that the residues are finite rank operators. So the set of poles, I will call it Rx, which are resonances. So it's very relevant for the wave equation problem, for example. You see it appearing very naturally when you look at solution of the wave equation with compactly supported initial data. If you want to do some contour deformation, then you see that you need that type of continuation. Okay, so they appear very naturally in this wave equation problem, but also in counting problems. If you want to count the number of elements in the group, then you end up looking at Poincaré series, and Poincaré series are related to the green function of the Laplacian. So if you want to make a meromorphic continuation of Poincaré series, you end up with resonances. Okay, so now spectral gap picture. Okay, so spectral gap means that you can separate the base eigenvalue or the leading resonance in this picture, depending on the usual dichotomy, from the rest of the spectrum. So if delta is bigger than 1/2, you have this picture. Here you have finitely many guys, and there you have poles coming from the resonances coming from the meromorphic continuation. So the picture so far was something like that. We didn't know how close to the, so there are no resonances on this axis. That is a well-known fact. And so we learned recently by Bourgain-Dyatlov that, based on the fractal uncertainty principle, that there is a tiny strip here, okay, that may be very small, where there are only finitely many guys, okay? So this is the epsilon naught given by Bourgain-Dyatlov, the recent result. Then there is another picture when delta is smaller than 1/2. When delta is smaller than 1/2, the picture is slightly different because your unitary axis is still here. Delta has moved here. Okay? So you already know that there is a spectral gap because there cannot be any resonances on the right of delta just by some Poincaré series argument, by convergence of Poincaré series. Okay? So you already have a spectral gap here.
Delta itself
Delta itself is
or
the resonance, but on the left, on the right of delta, there is nothing. Okay.
Even on the same line, there is no.
Even on the line, there is nothing. Okay. And then there are possible resonances here. And what I would like to explain using these techniques of transfer operator is that there is an extra gap here. So it is slightly different from the gap that has been obtained here by Bourgain-Dyatlov. It's a slightly different question. There is another gap on the left of delta. Okay. So this is by myself, but a long time ago, based on techniques of Dolgopiat. So both results fall in a more general picture. So I have to mention that this result has been slightly now improved by Longjin and Semyon Dyatlov by a different technique. And we will talk about that later. They have been able to show that this, so in my result, this epsilon naught depends completely on the group, okay? But he has been able to see that this guy depends only on delta, okay? So that may look like a minor improvement, but it's actually very relevant because it tells you that this gap, so of course, there may be finitely many guys here. We have no control on the number of guys here, but the size of this gap can be taken depending uniquely on delta. Okay, so it may look like a minor improvement, but actually it's telling you that up to a finite cover of the surface, this gap can be taken uniform. Okay, of course. There may be a lot of resonances here. These finitely many guys, they may depend on the cover, of course, but asymptotically, for high frequencies, for high imaginary parts, we can take a uniform gap. And this fact also has also been observed in the work of Shio, Dale Winter, and Michael Magee, using the technique of transfer operator when they look at congruence subgroup. Okay. So what's next? So I said that you can put everything in a global picture. Okay. So there is an actual conjecture which will unify these two results. Which says the following. Which says that for all epsilon positive, there are only finitely many resonances. So it's a result on the size of the essential spectral gap. So only finitely many resonances on the right, on the half plane, real part of S bigger than delta over 2 plus epsilon. Okay? Okay? So of course when epsilon goes to 0, they may accumulate on this line. Okay? But epsilon being fixed, there are only finitely many resonances. Okay? So if you believe in this conjecture, of course, both results belong to the same picture. Okay? If there is a gap all the way up to delta over 2, for sure, you can cross the unitary axis, and there is a tiny strip here, no matter delta, no matter where delta is. Okay? And the same here. Of course, if there is a, if you can go all the way up to delta over 2, for sure there is a small gap here. So it's a bit silly. Okay. So I will explain, but I will explain in a moment some heuristic arguments to.
Normally this is somehow not unrelated to the Riemann hypothesis or something, right? Or
There is absolutely no connection with the Riemann hypothesis, but
even so,
if
what happens if you have finite volume?
Yes, so
equality
no,
volume surface
no.
and you have the Riemann zeta function appears in the
no,
eigenvalue zero.
okay, so if you look at the modular surface, for example, delta is equal to 1, and the critical line is 1/2. Okay, of course they are the Riemann 0, but they are further into the spectrum, so they don't count. But you already know that you have all the embedded eigenvalues on the line. Real part is equal to 1/2. So this conjecture is exactly true in the finite volume case. Okay, and more generally, if you take any geometrically finite surface with finite volume, it has been shown by Selberg that resonances they have to accumulate on the critical line. Real part is equal to 1/2. Okay, so it's very consistent with the finite volume case, but the Riemann hypothesis is something which is deeper into the spectrum. Okay. Okay, so
So, for delta greater than 1/2, what do you deduce just from the Lax-Phillips result that there are finitely many eigenvalues below the quarter?
here
Right.
it's just
This is stronger, but what do you get just from that?
what you
From
get.
the point of view of resonances.
You get nothing. You know nothing. You just know that there are eigenvalues here, and then
It doesn't tell you anything.
it doesn't tell you anything on resonances. Okay. By definition, they are here. Okay.
Yeah, somehow from the point of view of counting, say.
For the point of view of counting, no,
it is
okay.
the gap between
yes. So for the
between-
point of view of the wave equation or counting or prime geodesic theorem,
It is the gap between.
it is already nice because you have a gap. So you have prime geodesic theorem with exponentially small remainders, hyperbolic
and that
lattice
is an
counting.
analog of that result. From the point of view of counting, your result gives
Yes.
the
So from
remainder term, which is exponentially
Yes,
small,
yeah.
which you deduce from Lax-Phillips in the case of.
yes,
okay.
exactly. And now, of course, the Burgan-Dyatlov result is telling you that you can gain some tiny epsilon over all these remainders. You can improve the remainders. Okay. Okay. So transfer operators. So you can start all the way here. So as I said, this very specific class of group, you can uniformize them by a Schottky representation. Okay, so just think about the Poincaré upper half plane model, and you have an even number of. Okay, so let me do something like that, just to change slightly the picture. So you have, in a formal way, you have an even number of disks. Say that they are open. They are orthogonal to the boundary of H2, which is the real line here in this model. And you have you pick some PSL2R guys, which are doing the identification in such a way that you have so there is a choice. There is a choice when you order these guys, but you can say that gamma j, the gamma j is mapping dj on the complementary of say dj plus p. Okay, it's just a convention. Okay, so if this is I don't know, d1, then this is d3 and d2 and d4. Okay, but there is no connection between the pairings and the ordering you choose here. Okay, so in that case, the surface you obtain is not the quotient by the group here. It's not a pair of points. It's a torus with one funnel. Okay, and because the identifications here are crossing. So this is what you get here in this picture. Okay. And then what we are going to do, which is a bit strange, but we are going to define a dynamical system, which is due to Bowen and series on the boundary. And this dynamical system, in some sense, is a way to construct a cross-section of the geodesic flow. And then associated to this dynamical system, there is a transfer operator, and you will see that you can say something about resonances just out of this transfer operator. So Bowen series map is just, you take, you look at what's going on the boundary here. Okay, so the intersection of each disk with the real line, with the boundary of the hyperbolic plane. You call this guy ij's, okay? So you look at the union of this interval. Okay? And you define a map. So this map is open. So it may go to infinity. It's not an issue. It's defined very simply. T of x is just equal to gamma j of x when x belongs to ij. So of course you have to explain what are the ij's when you are when j is bigger than p. Okay, so you just take the inverse of the corresponding gamma j. Okay.
I better ask you because I'm confused about it.
Sure.
You originally defined gamma to be the group generated by gamma 1, gamma 2, and you have this.
No, but if the converse is true, you take any convex compact group, then you can view it like that. Okay.
But your original
Another
surface
question.
didn't have any genus, so.
You're confused about the shape of the surface.
The shape of the surface.
It's
Originally
not the
drew
three.
this thing with the
Yeah,
four
there
things.
were two examples presented.
There are two examples: the funnel,
So this is just a.
and here the picture. The picture is just another example.
oh, it's
Okay,
just another
but it's a general construction. You take.
10 discs and
You
get
can take 10 disks and some random identification. It gives you something.
surface and something you do with it.
Okay.
Okay.
So now you look at this dynamical system here. Okay. And this guy is going to be an expanding dynamical system. And you can see that, of course, there are holes. So most points will escape to infinity. But what remains inside is exactly the limit set. Okay. So there is some non-wandering set, which is the limit set. Okay. But instead of looking at the full action of the group, you simplify the problem by looking at the action of a single dynamical system, which may be in the course of, when you do that, you may lose a lot of information, but it is effective in some ways. So, okay, so you recover the limit set of the group by looking at the point that do not escape to infinity. Okay, so all the pre-images, the intersection of all the pre-images of this map. And T has some expanding properties, because these maps, okay, the way we define it, we define it in a neighborhood where the gamma j's are actually expanding.
Excuse me, may I ask you something? So
Sure.
here you have additional symmetries. Centers of the disks lie on the line or not necessarily?
Yes, they do. All the disks are geodesic disks. It's an actual, so the complementary of the disk is a fundamental domain for the action of gamma, okay? Okay, so T is expanding, so I don't want to give definition, just say that eventually the derivative are, when you iterate, they are uniformly bigger than 1, okay? So this is telling you that this dynamical is good. And associated to this dynamical, there is what we call the topological pressure. We already saw some version of the topological pressure in the previous talks. So when you are doing, when you are playing with transfer operators, you really use all the knowledge you have on the topological pressure. So you can define it like that for this very specific system. You look at the, I will call it e to the p of sigma, which is by definition the limit when n goes to infinity. So it's very much like the topological entropy, except that you put some weights. So here I define it through the periodic orbits, which is convenient. So here you sum over all the nth periodic orbits of T, and you put the weight. So the weight here is given by the expansion rate or the contraction rate, if you prefer. And you look at that, it gives you something. You call it topological pressure. Of course, there are several possible definitions, which I don't want to discuss here. Of course, if you take sigma is equal to 0, then this is the topological entropy. So why is it important? You will see very soon. It's because of a famous result of Bowen. You can recover the Hausdorff dimension of the limit set through the topological pressure. So the picture, so this function is actually real analytic. It's a strictly convex function. It decays. So at 0, it's exactly the topological entropy of T, which you can compute explicitly here, depending on the number of generators. And this function will vanish. So it's strictly convex, real analytic. It will vanish exactly at delta. Okay? Where delta is still the Hausdorff dimension of the limit set. Okay? So that's Bowen's pressure formula. So it's actually a very general formula which is valid for all conformal dynamical systems. So all the fractal sets which are defined by a family of conformal contraction, for example, then you can recover the Hausdorff dimension by the topological pressure. So why it is relevant? We will arrive to the point soon. Once you have this dynamical system, then there is a theory, an old theory, which is mostly due to Ruel and Sinai and Bowen, which say that there is an interesting operator which comes from statistical mechanics, which is given by the following formula, which may look a bit mysterious for sure at first. So I will explain. So f is a function which is living on a neighborhood of the limit set. Okay, so f is in C0 of I. Okay, just to begin with. Okay, and so you sum over all the preimages of any point. You weight it by the derivative, and here you have a complex parameter which is exactly, which will correspond to the Selberg parameter. Okay.
Should have X on the left-hand side. Should have X on the left-hand side.
Sure, here you have X. Okay. Okay, so S, I'm just warning you, S is going to be the previous S. It's not by mistake. So of course, if you want some nice spectral properties for this operator, you need to act on smooth functions. C0 is not good. It's not even. I mean, it's a bounded operator for sure, but the spectrum is filling a disk. It's not interesting. But what you can do, you can let it act on CK function. And so you can use all CK spaces. And it will be a bounded operator for sure. And if you take a real analytic function, so very regular functions. So you have to be more precise. You have to specify a specific domain where you do have holomorphic continuation, etc. But I don't want to enter the detail. But just to say that if you let act your operator on a well-chosen space of holomorphic functions, then this is a trace class operator. So if you are talking about trace class, of course, you need a Hilbert space, and this will be a Bergman space, for example, or a Hardy space. But I don't need to enter the details. I just want to show you why this object is relevant for this type of problems. The point is, if it's a trace class operator, you can compute a determinant. So it's difficult to attribute this theorem to specific people, but I guess Polycott was probably, and maybe also Fried, back in the days, were the first to observe that fact, is that the determinant of I minus LS is equal to an object which is a Selberg zeta function of the surface. So Selberg zeta function is defined again by analytic continuation, and it's a product over closed geodesics. It's a product of say gamma in P, and you take 1 minus e to the minus s L of gamma plus k. You don't need to put a minus here. P is what? P is a set of closed geodesics. Okay? A set of closed geodesics. A primitive closed geodesics on X. yes, L of gamma, L is the length, and you need to, so K is this K here, an integer, okay, 0. Okay, so it's just shifting the rho L zeta function. Okay, so of course this product is only defined for real part of S bigger than delta. But there is some analytic continuation. It's actually an entire function. And it's also, it coincides with this determinant. Okay. So how do we get to the spectral picture? Because there is another result of Patterson and Perry, which say that what we know from Selberg in the case of cofinite or co-compact groups is actually still true in this setup, but you have to replace the spectrum, the Laplacian, by resonances. So Patterson and Perry says that non-trivial zeros of Z gamma of S is the same thing as resonances. So you have to exclude the so-called trivial zeros, which are some topological zeros, which are located at negative integers. Okay, so this guy have no spectral meaning, but all the other guys with multiplicity, they coincide with the set of resonances. Okay, so now you see that from these two pictures, you can relate the spectrum of transfer operators to resonances. If you have resonances, then one must be in the spectrum of LS. Okay. So that's the basic connection. So S belongs to the set of resonances, trivial zeros aside, if and only if one is in the spectrum of LS. Okay.
So for which S is this trace LS?
For all S in C, the operator is well defined and is a trace class operator, and it depends holomorphically of S. Okay.
Easy to see that it's trace class.
It's just by Montel's results. It's just the compactness of contraction operators in the holomorphic category. Okay. Holomorphic contractions, they give you trace class operators. So it's basically a sum of contraction operators, okay, weighted by some stuff. Okay, so
Can I ask you some really basic questions?
Sure,
Because
sure,
I'm not really familiar with these transfer operators. Transfer operators are, often defined by choosing a transversal to the flow. and
that's what you do here, actually.
So-
So there is a cross section at infinity. This is what you are doing here. When you
Why-
take this
why
Bowen
is it
series
one-
map,
Why just one dimensional as opposed to two dimensions?
no, because you already quotiented by unstable manifolds, if you want, or stable manifolds. You have reduced the problem 2 times to just an expanding map. You started from a flow, you take a cross section, then you have
So you
some
think
kind
we
of
should
Anosov
think of
map.
this, I as like
And then you-
wouldn't be like the unstable manifolds.
Yes, so you can parameterize. No, it's related to the parametrization of the unit tangent bundle to the endpoints of geodesics and the length.
I understand that.
So that's a way to construct an explicit cross-section and coding of the geodesic
And
flow.
in your definition of the pressure, you used periodic points at T.
Yes,
So the fixed points at T are like correspond to the closed geodesics.
exactly. They correspond to closed geodesics
And
because
what about the periodic points?
no, the periodic points also.
just the closed geodesics.
All the periodic points correspond to closed geodesics.
Okay.
And the way you relate it is just by looking at the derivative of the map at any of these fixed point, repelling fixed point. And you get E to the length of the corresponding closed geodesics. So in some sense here, it's no longer here, but when you looked at the formula of the transfer operator, you have a phase, you have a complex parameter S, you have a phase, and this phase is related to a return time map or to length.
I mean, so you can sort of verify this theorem over here just by expressing everything in terms of closed geodesics and derivative.
That's how you prove it.
Okay.
You
You mentioned this operator LS has a connection to statistical mechanics.
Yes.
So is there a simple model in statistical mechanics for a similar theorem like that?
Yes, so I did not mention all that stuff because it's not useful for my business, but they're an actual coding by a subshift of finite type of the dynamics. And so if you look at the statistical mechanics on this subshift of finite type, you can pull it back to the actual dynamical system. That's how you construct invariant measure and stuff like that. So all this business of transfer operator is coming from this so-called thermodynamical formalism, where you emulate statistical mechanics to apply it to hyperbolic systems and to construct lots of invariant measures. And okay. Okay. So now a conjecture by Dolgopiat and Polycott. I will state it here. So when you look at this transfer operator, you have a whole bunch of function space that you can choose. Okay. So obviously, the real analytic category is very interesting for determinant because of the trace class properties. But sometimes it is easier just to work with subless spaces or to stay just on the real line. You don't need to complexify. So I will state the Dolgopiat Polycott conjecture. So it's actually a very general conjecture on transfer operator, and it has nothing to do with our problem. No conjecture. The conjecture is saying the following thing. It's saying that if you look at the norm of the iterates of the transfer operator acting on, say, CK space, okay, it should be satisfying bounds like that. I will explain very soon what it means. It has to be valid for T large. And so S is sigma plus IT, okay? So your complex parameter S, you write it like sigma plus IT. And this conjecture is saying that, so this should be true for all n. You have some bounds on the iterates of the transfer operator like that. So there is some loss here which depend on the imaginary part that you cannot avoid. But the interesting part is given by this factor here, which depending on sigma will tell you if the operator is actually a contraction or not. Okay? But this is valid only for large, very large imaginary parts. Okay? So the point is, so what's the meaning of this conjecture? It's a square root cancellation statement. Okay? So when t is equal to 0, so some remarks, because it's quite difficult to understand the
you raise e to n times p of
2 sigma divided by 2. Okay? So I will explain why this conjecture is actually implying the other conjecture.
So it's not always true, like for all transfer operators, you don't always have contractions.
No, this bound is it's completely conjectural. I mean,
No
Nobody has ever touched this kind of statement.
If everything was orthogonal, if all of your faces.
Yes,
were
basically it means, this statement means basically that when you look at the transfer operator and when you iterate, I will write down the formula very soon, all the non-diagonal terms are orthogonal, and so there is the maximum possible cancellation, and what you recover is the pressure at 2 sigma. So you can see now that from Bowen's formula, essentially you can compute the spectral radius here, forget about these contraction estimates, compute the spectral radius if the conjecture is true. So I should call it R spectral radius of LS. If this conjecture is true, spectral radius of LS is smaller than e to the p of 2 sigma over 2. And the point is, by Bowen's formula, if sigma is strictly bigger than delta over 2, then this guy is negative. So you have a contraction. Okay, so this is a contraction for very large imaginary part. So you cannot have resonances when imaginary part is large, whenever sigma is strictly bigger than delta over 2. So that gives you the Jacobson conjecture, okay? And all the other conjectures. Of course, it's a bit it's a rather cocky conjecture for sure, because what you're asking is that the maximum cancellation rate is actually occurring, so it's a very optimistic conjecture. Like 99 or something. It's in the paper shortly after the Dolgopiat's thesis. Yes, so if you look at the formula for the iterates of the transfer operator acting on a function, what you get is, if you square it, okay? If you square it, you get a double sum over all the preimages. So over y and y prime. So here you have your contraction factors, which will give you the topological pressure term. Here there is a minus sigma and minus sigma here times some interesting stuff. There is some oscillating phase here, depending on y and y prime, times essentially fy, fy prime conjugate, okay? So if you believe that all the off-diagonal terms will cancel because of this phase, which should be non-vanishing and non-stationary, then what remains is somehow the diagonal term, and diagonal term will give you just 2 sigma here. It will square these guys, and you go back to the pressure formula, you get P of 2 sigma. Okay? So this statement is exactly a square root cancellation statement. Okay? And so what the Dolgopiat techniques allow you to do, to conclude, yes?
Just this conjecture seems weird. If sigma is equal to delta and t is 0.
No, but it's only valid for very large T.
Okay.
It's only relevant for very large imaginary parts. So T naught is very large. Okay. It's all about cancellation for large T. So what Dolgopiats allow you to do is to prove something which is much weaker, but very much in the same spirit. It allows you to prove that there is some actual contraction, but in a very tiny strip. So Dolgopiat style result. it's just saying that, so let me state the result, you know, we started 5 minutes later, so that you can find some tiny epsilon, some large T naught, and something which is strictly smaller than 1, and some constant C beta, so that for all n large, no, for all n, okay, the norm of LSN, so exactly the same type of estimate. So you have some polynomial growth in T, but you have a contraction factor here. And this is valid, of course, this is valid for S close to delta in real part and imaginary part larger than T naught. Okay? So what you can prove is that you have some contraction estimates in a very tiny strip on the left of real part of sigma. The real part of S is equal to delta, and that gives you the spectral gap. But there are many other things that you can do based on that. It's actually stronger than just a spectral gap. You can use this to continue Poincaré series or to recover some other type of estimates. Okay, and what I should say to conclude, the point of this result is that in spirit, it is very different from the fractal uncertainty principle approach, because the way we prove the existence of the spectral gap is by exhibiting cancellations in these guys. But we are not using the fractal structure of the limit set, and actually the result goes through in higher dimension. This is essentially why, because we don't really use the fractal structure. We only need that a certain measure, which is related to Patterson-Sullivan measure, is a doubling measure. We do not use the Halford-Davis regularity. We do not use the fine structure of the Cantor set. Actually, the Cantor set is working against you. You don't use it to your advantage in this type of proof. All the spectral gap is really coming from catching cancellation, so using these phase oscillations.
It's a
Okay.
dynamically defined set though, so.
Yes, but
Yeah,
structuralist,
you
what I want,
will
my
be
point is structuralist, the proof are very different. Okay?
You do gaps?
No, we don't. I mean, you have
It's
to
an
fight against it because they work against you. Okay?
Yep.
But the proof works when the limit set is the full circle. Huh? Of course, the result is trivial, but the proof works. You recover the spectral gap from spectral theory, and it works also when the limit set is a very weird quasi-circle, for example, when you have quasi-function group, Kleinian groups. Okay, so it's interesting to put things into perspective and to see how the interaction of these different technique can help improve the results. I don't know. I have the feeling that maybe you need to combine both in some way to.
Doing this afternoon.
So thank you.